Greetings everyone, Side 2. Today I have just finished reading The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence, and this is one of those highly anticipated books everybody says was like book of the year, one of those like epic legendary books that you don't see every day. I'm not even sure how to explain. Like, this is one of those books nobody ever tells you what it's about. But they say, oh, it was just amazing, it's great, it's my favorite book. And I can see why a lot of people would say this is their favorite book. But it's weird. And it's not 100% my cup of tea. But it's also so good that I would have to recommend everybody read it. It's hard to explain. It's like, I did like it. I liked it a lot. But it's weird. It's not your typical fantasy novel. And it's not set in an entirely fantastical universe. It's kind of set in our universe in a different time. Sort of, but not really. Because it's... I'm going to have to try to just break it down for you. Basically, I didn't like the beginning because there's two main point of views. This girl, Levira, she's from the dust. Like this place outside of this big city. And the city has this semi-magical, or maybe just technological, so advanced that we can't distinguish from magic, kind of place that has this, it's like an infinite, almost, possibly infinite library of like different chambers. And the library has all these different rules. But anyway, we'll get to that. The girl gets her little village kind of gets wiped out by these enemies that are called sabbers. They're kind of like gnolls. They describe them as kind of like dog people. But there is also a dog in the library, like a spirit animal, little guide, kind of a dog. So there's real dogs and there's these dog people that they call sabbers. But then later you find out that the word sabber just means enemy. And the sabbers call the humans sabbers because they're their enemy. So then they start calling the sabbers caniths because they're kind of like canines, but humanoid canines or something like that. So the whole time you're reading about Evar, he's the other guy. He's a sabber, but you don't know he's a sabber until like about halfway through. So you go back and forth between Levira, a human, and Evar, who you assume is a human. And Levira is being taken to the city by the sabbers that killed her village, and then they get killed by this guy who's a soldier, and he takes them the rest of the way, and then he drops her off, and she kind of gets, they have to all be allocated into jobs in the city, and there's 5 different doors, and she sneaks into the 5th door by mistake or something, and kind of like, they find out she's way smarter than everyone else, so they give her this job. Kind of like this guy Ute. He's like this weird fellow. Ute and the head librarian are weird. They like have super pale skin, and you'll find out why later on. But they're not originally humans. And there's this whole like fight between good and evil, and you find out that the sabbers are like approaching the city, and they're trying to like attack the city. But also, they're being chased by this other enemy that's even worse than they are, called the Skier, right? Nobody talks about any of this stuff. They just talk about it's a book about a giant magical library of infinity and stuff. It's like there's all these like references to Christianity, sort of, and good and evil, sort of towards the end, especially. There's a lot of like Wheel of Time, kind of time loop things with Levira and Evar, like she's writing a book that hasn't been written yet, but then he finds it in the past, and then they meet together in this nexus between worlds of his future, and she's in the past, but she's actually up here with him, but he doesn't know it. And then you go backwards in time, you're kind of like become a ghost, and you can see what happened before, but you can't influence it. And then the guy Ute, he's the guy that like gives her a job at the library. He has this whole theory about the fire line. Like, when humanity reaches a certain state of technology, they destroy themselves, like with nuclear bombs. And the point of the library is like it's an eternal place where you learn from the past and you can gain technological advancement to fight off the enemy. But the more you learn, the more dangerous you are, and you end up destroying yourself. And the burning the library down is kind of like part of it. But the library is so vast and infinite. It's like built into this mountain, so you think maybe it's just as big as the mountain, but it's also other worlds have their own library, and it's connected to this library. And other species like the sabbers and the skier, they have certain chambers in the library are only supposed to be opened by certain species. But there's all these rules. Like if the library's on fire, then any door can be opened by anybody because it's like an emergency. There's these people called the assistants, which are like, and the soldiers. They're like these, almost like made out of marble. Sometimes they don't even move because they're kind of like outside of time, with like halfway outside of time. But they will help you find books, and they can pull books out of the Nexus using portals that they can create. Using their blood, they can create a portal to this. The Nexus is called the Exchange. And it's kind of like the wood between worlds, right? And like, I was like in my living room watching, I have like an old website called The Wood Between Worlds that I had favorited from years and years ago. I think it has something to do with this like fake Beatles album that was supposed to be like from a different world or something like that. And I started reading it, and it's kind of been updated. It's kind of weird. Anyway, so his whole storyline is like he has these brothers and sisters, are sort of like Clovis is this female, and he's got another brother that's like a spy, and one brother that was like a historian that's gone missing, and another brother that was like an assassin, sort of, right? Or one of those political, something like that. There's these things called mechanisms in the library that you take a book into it and you kind of live the book, and it creates physical reality around you, and they've gone and taken turns like gaining all these skills to become good at fighting or assassination or spying or whatever, or history. But his book was written by this girl, Levira, in the past. So when he came out of it, he'd forgotten everything that he experienced because it was like halfway written, and it was like they make it up as they go on. It's like this whole like esoteric, you gotta kind of interpret it kind of, but it's really wild. Another thing this book does, which a lot of books that I really enjoy do, is like Ender's Game and The Way of Kings. They have a little teaser before each chapter. And some of the teasers, it's like something like the book, it'll say a little quote from a book, and the book would be like Appetite for Destruction by Rose L. Axel. So you gotta think, oh, that's Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses. Appetite for Destruction was the album that they wrote. Or one was like a book about manners by Emily Post, which is a real person in our universe. Or Neil Gaiman was one. It was like Gam in Neiman or something like that. It was like backwards. And a lot of them were like Mark Lawrence himself. There are a couple of them that were like from his other book about the nun or whatever. Holy Sister or White Sister or something like that. So I love all that kind of stuff, but it also makes you think this is kind of like based in modern day time. It's not like a fantastical world. There's nobody ever uses magic, I don't think. Although making the portals with the blood is kind of like magic. And then there's like these guides that kind of appear, like there's a raven named Edgar Allan, like Edgar Allan Poe. I didn't even realize that just now, that his name was Edgar Allan, like Edgar Allan Poe. So there's this big black dog one. I think that's the only ones in the book. But then, like, it just gets wild. Ever's family, they kind of live in this one chamber surrounded by stacks of books. And it's like, they kind of don't care if the books get damaged. They, like, plant plants in... I don't know how there's dirt there. It's kind of like dust and like old pages of books that have kind of decomposed over time, or maybe like dead people decomposed and made dirt or something else, and then they're growing plants to eat. Because the library has all these rules, like there's light, but it doesn't come from anywhere, so you don't have a shadow. There's the thing about the doors, only certain people can open. The guides can open more doors, but you kind of have to convince them or something. There's not like bathrooms, but there's like way off in the corners they've built bathrooms, because like if you leave something on the ground, it'll just dissipate over time. So that's how they figured out. Like the library's so big, you have to like take water and supplies if you go off for like a couple of days journey to like the longer shelves where the book might be that you want, and you have to like camp out there. And there's like these little circles that have sustenance that keep you alive, but they don't really feed you, so it's like not real food. So you can't really stay there forever. And also, you can't bring food into the library. So if you have like food with you, the assistants will just like didn't make it disappear or something like that. There's all these like weird rules. Things, the fire door too, like if something catches on fire. Yeah. And the assistants and the soldiers, they'll fight off these things called escapes that come out of the mechanisms or out of portals. Wasn't really clear about how the escapes work or what they are. It kind of got into the end, like the assistants, when they get cut or like wounded, they have a hole that they can receive. The escapes can get into them and corrupt them, and it turns them kind of gray. And then a human that goes back through time in a portal and encounters an assistant, they can kind of take them over too, and they kind of become like a yellowish kind of marble. Almost gives you kind of a chess feeling with it, like chess pieces or something, or like Through the Looking Glass with Alice in Wonderland. You know how they had like those chess pieces, kind of give you one of those kind of vibes. Also, kind of the labyrinth of the library kind of made you think of Piranesi a little bit. But even on the cover, the library doesn't look like this, I don't think. The spiraling staircases and all this kind of stuff with lights. It's more just like rows and rows of just big, tall shelves like I have. If you climb on top of them, you can see farther. Some of the shelves may be taller than trees. Some of them, like, they're labyrinthine patterns in different chambers and stuff, but it's really wild. And then there's some scenes that are, like, in the city outside the library, where, like, Levira has to, like, kind of level up from being an apprentice to, like, an assistant librarian. And, like, they have different colored robes from, like, white to gray. And, like, the blacker your robe gets, the more you become closer to being the head librarian. And then the head librarian had, like, all these books that she'd been, like, keeping in her room for herself. They're, like, the ones everybody really wants you can't get because she's hoarding them. But then her and Ute turn out to be, like, they used to be assistants, but they gave up their eternal life or whatever, so they can become human, so they can kind of try to stop this cycle of, you know, getting powerful and then destroying yourselves and, like, having wars break out. And they had different theories. There's just like the person that created the library too, him and the guy Jaspeth that's against him. They're supposed to be like the son or the grandsons of Adam and Eve. There's also one of the little snippets above the chapters was by Noah, the guy who created the ark, you know. So there's all these like references to Christianity blended into all this kind of shit. So it's kind of like good and evil. Like one created the library and one's trying to destroy the library, but they were both. There's also, what was it? The assistants are made from the body of the library, and the escapes are made from the blood of the library. So they're kind of fighting and trying to. One's trying to destroy it, one's trying to preserve it. They didn't really explain all this stuff, but the book ended on a crazy cliffhanger that it just stops. There's no epilogue. It's just kind of like, take my hand if you want to live. Like, I know where everybody, I know where she is. Let's go. And then it's like, oh, okay. So it's going to be like that. You got to wait for the next book to find out what happens. But it's like, the book felt like it was 1,200 pages long, but it was only like 560 pages long. So it's just like, I can't believe it covered so much stuff in the amount of pages it did. It must be really dense, like a long word count or something. But I don't know, man. It's just like, it's wild. I can't really say it's one of my favorite books, but I can't really say it's not fucking epic at the same time. I can see why it's a lot of people's favorite books. But just those first chapters with Ivar's POV was just kind of putting me to sleep. Because it's so kind of out there, it's hard to like understand what's going on. There's not a lot of dialogue because he's usually by himself all the time, where Levira's in the city with humans and they're having conversations. It's more entertaining and keep reading, but like, I don't know. But then when they come together, and they both realize that they're enemies of each other, but they don't hate each other. And then their friends still hate each other, so they got to convince them not to kill each other. And then there's this whole thing with the library burning down at the end. After they went back in time and saw like what the whole deal was, and they realized Jute was as old as he is because they went back thousands of years and he was a young child or something. I mean, that's spoiling all this stuff, but it's fine. You can still read it. We're ready to get over this spoiler alert stuff. It's fine. But, like, yeah, a lot of the other human characters were pretty interesting, too. Like Milan, you thought he was going to be, like, a love interest, but then she's also in love with this guy from another time, so you don't know, like, who she's going to hook up with. It's kind of a romance story. It's like a big, actually, a lot of this is like it's a romance mixed in with a fantasy, but it's not like a typical fantasy. It's like there's no magic. It's not really a different world than ours, but it kind of is. It's just like this one city and a desert. You don't know where's the rest of the world. You don't understand it. There's books about like sailing ships, but like is there still oceans, or are we like talking about almost like it's on Mars or something? I don't know. But they talk about like other cultures and other cities like to escape to, so there must be other cities. So you don't really know how big the world is or if the world is on Earth. You kind of think it would be. It's almost, yeah, they talk about the weapons they have. Like they call them arrow sticks at first, and then like as they gain more technology, you kind of realize they're talking about guns, I guess, at that point. So maybe the guns were like crossbows or something, or like guns that shot arrows, and then now they're shooting bullets, and then they start shooting like poisonous, explodey ammunition, and like they're almost getting to the point where they have bombs and blowing stuff up at that point at the end. So I don't know. I'm gonna give it 5 stars, but I don't know what to think about this book. It's wild.